Okay, so here we are on crash sheet. We're going to pull the steering wheel and clock spring to give us access to the wiper stalk and the headlight stalk, and we're going to go ahead and pull the headlight stalk to demonstrate what would be required to swap it out with a headlight stalk that has the fog light switch. So if we're installing a set of fogs and we wanted to go completely OEM, we would purchase the replacement stalk, and this is what would be involved. Now in Crashy's case here, the airbag is already removed. The airbag was popped on Crashy, so we can see here that the wires actually are cut. The wires were pretty severely damaged when the airbag popped, so I had just clipped them when I pulled the airbag off initially. If you were doing this on a live car, you would start with first removing the two screws from the steering wheel here. They're out on the sides. You can see where my finger's sticking through there on that side, and over on this side we would loosen those two torque screws there and remove those. That would allow us to pull the airbag out. We would then disconnect the two connectors on the airbag as well as the connector for the horn. Now the first tool that we need here after the Torx bit, the T27 Torx bit for removing those, is we will need a 19mm socket to remove the steering wheel. So in my case here, I actually already have it loosened up, so this is going to come off quite easily. And before we remove the steering wheel, we want to make sure that we mark it so that we have it aligned properly when we come back. So in this case, you can see I've got an ink mark across the center of the steering column, one on the steering wheel as well to line it up with. And we also, before we pull this off, should put a piece of tape on the clock spring to keep it centered. In my case, I'm just going to use some blue painter's tape since it's nice and visible. So I am just going to put a piece of tape on the top of the steering column to keep that clock spring in place. Okay, now to remove the steering wheel, we could use a steering wheel puller, or simply rocking the steering wheel a little bit will allow the steering wheel to pull right off. So our steering wheel is now removed. Okay, now we have our clock spring. Now the clock spring has two connectors. We have the airbag connector, which in my case has already been pulled, and we have the horn connector, which if we had an 09 or newer would actually have two additional wires in it for the cruise control stalk. Okay, so now at this point I am ready to pull the clock spring. So to remove the clock spring, there are two clips that we need to release to remove it. There's one here and there's a second one over here. So we just simply clip those with our finger and we can slide the clock spring off. Now again, by having it taped, I am preventing it from being able to rotate right now. So I'm keeping it properly centered for when I stick it back on there. Okay, now at this point we have access to our stalks. If I wanted to remove the wiper stalk, I would disconnect the two connectors and I would simply release with a screwdriver the clip, and now my wiper stalk's off. So why would I want to pull the wiper stalk? To replace it with a Prius, etc. There's quite a few different ones that we could replace it with that would give us, instead of having just a single intermittent mode, would give us the extra turn knob, which would allow it to be fully intermittent. Okay, so that's removing the wiper stalk. Okay, so to remove the headlight stalk is this entire black plastic assembly. So unlike the wiper stalk, which was just a small section that plugs in here, the headlight stalk is the entire assembly here that we have to remove. So the first thing we're going to do is pull a connector for the headlight stalk, and I am going to use a pair of needle nose vice grips to release the band clamp, which is basically like a hose clamp that holds this assembly onto the steering column. So up on top here, I am going to grab that clamp, lock the vice grips. The advantage of using vice grips is now I'm holding them, so when I go ahead and need to put it back on, it's already squeezed, and even for pulling it off, it gives me the ability to be able to now grab it and not have to worry about trying to squeeze the clamp while using one hand to try to pull the thing off. So it's on there. There's a plastic clip on the top that actually holds it onto the steering column. So it's right by the center of that band clamp. I lift up on that plastic clip and rock it off, and now the entire assembly's off. So there's the band clamp being squeezed by the pair of vice grips. This is the clip here that I was releasing to then be able to slide it off. So now at this point, the entire steering column is exposed, and I'm ready to put my replacement one on. So if I had my replacement one with the Headlight Stalk, at this point I would first squeeze that band clamp, slide it on, and I'm going to slide it on until that clip snaps on. Now I can release the band clamp. Now it's on there rock solid, and I can just reverse things for putting it back together. So I put my wiper stalk back on, reconnect the two connectors for the wiper stalk. Okay, so while I have the clock spring off, just to show the taping of the clock spring, we have to make sure that we tape it such that we are actually covering the outer ring here. The ring on the outside with the markings on it, that is the critical piece. That's the part that rotates. So this connector and this ring rotates separately of the rest of the body. So when we tape it, we want to make sure that we're taping over that junction. Otherwise, if I tape it too far back, it can still rotate on me. So at this point we can see I can't rotate that connector. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and snap that back on. And actually, before I do, again, just to show the clips close up here, here we have one clip, two clip, and there actually is a third one on top. So those three clips are what I have to release to remove the clock spring, and what it gets engaged to put it back on. Now I don't want to remove the tape until I have the steering wheel back on. If I remove it now, I'll be able to rotate this connector and potentially have it in the wrong position. So again, the steering wheel is going to go back on at this point. I also, before I connect it, let's go ahead and plug the clock spring connector, the one for the horn, and again, if I still had my active airbag here, I would plug in the airbag connector as well. Okay, now my steering column, I'm going to line my marks back up and put my steering wheel back on. Now I can go ahead and put the 19mm nut back on. And I can go ahead and torque that down well. Okay, now that the steering wheel is back on, now I'm safe to go ahead and remove the tape. And again, we can see at this point, if I move the connector there, you can see how easily that would have rotated if that tape wasn't on. Okay, so at this point, I am now ready to reconnect the airbag connector, the two connectors that go to it, reconnect the horn connector, replace the airbag, put the two T27 screws back in, and then I can replace the steering column cover, and I would be all set at that point.